You're watching A News Today. I'm Leila Masimova. The top stories. The two-day G20 summit kicks off in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Leaders are set to begin discussions on global issues such as poverty and climate change. The International Atomic Energy Agency reports mass damage of electrical substations powering Ukraine's nuclear power plants. The second week of the largest climate conference, COP29, starts in the capital of Azerbaijan. Welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us. The G20 summit, gathering the leaders of the 20 major global economies, starts today in Rio de Janeiro. This two-day event in Brazil is expected to address social inclusion, global governance reform, and energy transition.
It's all final touches from here as Brazil gears up to host the G20 summit, expecting world leaders. Among them are the US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping. During Monday's opening ceremony, the country is also expected to officially launch the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. It's an initiative aimed at mobilizing countries in the fight against hunger by 2030. Meanwhile, concerns about the effectiveness of the summit are being voiced by locals, some who claim not to see any change. On Saturday, protesters in Rio de Janeiro sank giant cutouts of top G20 leaders in Botafogo Bay.
In anticipation of the meeting of the big global leaders at the G20, we are sinking these heads to represent how these leaders, who head some of the biggest economies in the world, are failing to face climate change.
26,000 troops have been deployed around the venue to reinforce security as more protests are expected following the event. The summit will coincide with the second week of the UN Climate Conference held in Azerbaijan. UN officials hope the G20 summit will also provide political momentum for a COP29 deal on climate financing.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged the G20 to take action on global challenges such as climate change and peace. Speaking in Rio de Janeiro just days after addressing the COP29 summit in Baku, Guterres warns that 2024 is likely to become the hottest year on record.
The world's strongest countries are being called upon to act now to save the planet. The United Nations chief, Antonio Guterres, says these nations must lead the fight against the climate emergency. He reminded world leaders at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro about the devastating drought in the Amazon and the catastrophic floods in Brazil as urgent examples of the escalating crisis.
And I have come to Rio with a simple message. G20 leaders must lead. And G20 countries, by definition, have tremendous economic clout and they yield massive diplomatic leverage. They must use it to tackle key global problems. Climate crisis has burned through another record, with 2024 likely to be the hottest year in history. We see the impacts everywhere and look no further than the drought in the Amazon and horrible floods in southern Brazil.
He also urged peace in conflict zones in Gaza, Ukraine and Sudan, calling for immediate ceasefires and respect for international law.
Everywhere, peace requires actions grounded in the values of the UN Charter, the rule of law, and the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states.
Guterres reminded leaders that while challenges are great, solutions are possible if the world's largest economies lead by example. He concluded, stressing the need to seize every opportunity to drive transformative action for a safer, more peaceful and sustainable world.
Large-scale Russian attacks have severely damaged electrical substations supporting Ukraine's nuclear power plants. This according to the latest report from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has visited sites in September and October.
The latest report from the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General says that Ukraine had to reduce electricity production after Russian strikes on the country's energy infrastructure. The nuclear power plants didn't shut down and were not directly hit, but the damage was to supporting substations. Currently, only 2 of the country's 9 operational reactors are currently running at full capacity. The International Atomic Energy Agency noted it had inspected 7 substations after attacks and will assess whether further site visits are needed following this latest wave.
President Joe Biden's administration will allow Ukraine to use its weapons for strikes deep into Russian territory, three sources familiar with the matter told Reuters. Ukraine is set to launch its first long-range attacks, likely using army tactical missile systems, though details remain secret. This move follows repeated requests from President Zelensky and comes amidst concerns over the Russian deployments of North Korean troops. It's uncertain whether President-elect Trump, who has been critical of U.S. aid to Ukraine, will stick with his policy he retakes power. The U.S. shift in President Joe Biden's arms policy may put Ukraine in a better negotiating position, according to former American diplomat Ian Kelly.
I think it's a signal to the Russians that the United States is not going to pull out, if that's the right way to put it, that we are going to continue to support Ukraine. The Republicans, who are taking over both houses of Congress, have leading Republicans have long said that we should remove these restrictions. So here you have the Democratic administration doing something that the Republicans have asked for, and so I think it's a signal that we're gonna continue to support Ukraine. It'll be 3 years of war in February. So I think there's a bit of fatigue as well with the war. So I think that there's an expectation across on both sides of Atlantic that we're going to have to engage diplomatically on this. And if you're going to do that, you have to put your side in as strong a position militarily or tactically as possible. And of course, that would mean you don't, you continue to provide support militarily while, in preparation for any kind of negotiated solution. He has, I think, drawn kind of a line in the sand, drawn a kind of a red line saying that U.S.-made weapons will be taken, very seriously, or be taken as as an unacceptable escalation or whatever. But I really don't think that Putin wants to take on the United States directly. So I don't think it's going to really. There's not going to be a direct military response to us. I can imagine that there will be some kind of indirect response, and that could come in the form of cyber attacks, disruption of our supply lines. I mean, there's lots of things that the Russians can do without actually attacking the United States directly. If you're talking about the eastern members, the frontline members, the Baltic states, Poland, of course, they've been calling for this for a long time, so that they will welcome this. And I think that there's been, there's been some annoyance at Washington by having this policy, because there are a number of Central European countries, Germany in particular, who've been quite happy to kind of sit back or hide behind our policy. And this, I think, will put a little more pressure on them to provide some weapons that they've been unwilling to hide. It really exposes them politically now, which is not something Germany wants now, given their kind of transitional political situation. I think that this development, the addition of foreign troops on the ground is, demanded some sort of response. And I find it interesting that Biden made this decision at a meeting of the Asian Pacific, at APEC, Asian Pacific Economic Council, I guess it is, because the South Koreans and the Japanese are looking at this and seeing a real broader threat if North Korea is sending ground troops, gaining valuable experience, possibly gaining some new game-changing technology in terms of ballistics for North Korean missiles. It's obviously going to be very threatening to the Japanese and particularly the South Koreans.
However, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the war in Ukraine has already escalated to another level.
Well, North Korean troops being deployed in Russia against Ukraine, this is a significant escalation, and it makes us even more focused and determined to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to fight off the Russians, including the North Koreans.
Russian President Vladimir Putin previously has said if he feels a country is being threatened, he will use the weapons available to him, including nuclear.
Почему-то на Западе считают, что
For some reason, the West believes that Russia will never use the nuclear weapons.
ядерная доктрина.
We have a nuclear doctrine.
Если
Look what it says.
действия будут угрожать,
If someone's actions threaten our sovereignty and territorial integrity, we consider it possible for us to use all means at our disposal.
средства.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time since 2022. At the end of last week, both sides maintained their positions on the war in Ukraine, speaking in Berlin airport before heading to the G20 summit in Brazil. Scholz said the court showed no sign of shift in Putin's stance.
In diesem Zusammenhang habe ich auch wie lange
In this regard, I also held talks with the Russian president, as announced a long time ago. It was important to say that he should not count on the support of Germany, Europe, and many others in the world in persuading Ukraine to reduce its actions, but it is up to him to ensure that the war comes to an end by withdrawing troops from his side. The conversation was very detailed and reiterated that the Russian president's views on the war have not changed much, which is not good news. However, this is precisely why it is so important that we remain clear on the question of principle, namely that Ukraine can rely on us and that this principle continues to apply. There will be no decisions over the heads of the Ukrainians, and many aspects will need to be discussed and renegotiated.
über die Köpfe der Ukraine hinweg wird es keine Entscheidung.
In the Philippines, a typhoon has swept across the main island of Luzon Sunday afternoon. It is the sixth tropical cyclone to enter the Philippines within a month. Over 1 million people have evacuated from the affected area in the north.
Its name is Man-yi, carrying winds of up to 185 kilometers per hour and causing damage to homes, schools, and commercial buildings in several areas. A Coast Guard team was deployed to help with finding residents in need of assistance. More than 1 million people were ordered to leave their homes in the northern part of the island, fearing rising water levels.
We left because every time there is a typhoon, the water rises in the nearby river. We have children with us and we are scared. That is why we left.
The storm is moving towards the central and southern parts of the island. So far, there have been no reported casualties. On average, about 20 tropical storms strike the Philippines each year, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and deadly landslides.
Now, the second week of the largest climate conference, the COP29, starts today in Baku. Earlier during the parliamentary meeting held as part of COP29, participants focused on addressing the unique vulnerabilities of different countries, including small island states, mountainous nations and landlocked countries. Parliamentarians discussed the growing impact of climate change to human health at COP29 summit. They are stressing the increased risks of the elderly and children. It was also emphasized that beyond financial support at COP29, investing in stronger healthcare systems is crucial.
For me, the contribution of parliamentarians is to vote on laws in favour of climate change that can help prevent many forms of climate change. This is my wish for the past, to avoid exacerbating climate change. The role of Parliament is also to oversee the government's actions regarding commitments to fight climate change.
Every parliamentarian in here, they would like their best. Everybody is saying what will be finance of this issue, because for struggling climate change, we need too much effort. It needs much more money. There is a big country such as America and China. These two countries is more than 70% of serra gas sent to atmosphere. So everybody waiting. This big country must support the finance. They must give too much finance because the small country needs the finance. That is the main subject.
First of all, parliamentarians have a key role in holding their governments accountable to their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. So most governments have the ambition to help climate change by committing to lower emissions. Parliamentarians can hold the government accountable to these NDCs, and they can also ensure that the budgets that governments bring to their parliaments finance and also ensure that these commitments are able to be carried out. Parliamentarians have a critical role in holding government accountable, and through the government budgets, they can ensure that energy transitions are financed in the government budget when it comes to Parliament. So I think these two elements are very important, and meetings on the sideline of COP ensure that parliamentarians understand the science and also the process involved through collaboration and sharing with other countries.
At COP29 in Baku, countries have agreed on a work program for non-market approach under Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. This move supports nations in achieving their climate goals through measures like adaptation finance and technology transfer, while also advancing sustainable development and poverty reduction. The COP29 presidency has prioritized the full implementation of Article 6, including transparent carbon markets. These markets are expected to channel critical investments to developing nations and could save countries up to $250 billion annually in meeting climate commitments. Staying at COP29, various side events and discussions are being held on the negative impacts of the mining industry. These were discussed by eco-activists from Kazakhstan, Mexico and Sweden.
Harmful substances released from mining activities can negatively impact the ecology of neighbouring countries via groundwater transference. That's what Swedish eco-activist Helen Lindmark said during a discussion at COP29 on the environmental impact of Armenia's mining industry on the South Caucasus.
We are facing the same threat that you are facing here. And one thing is that why we see it as a testimony is that we see it in the health issues, both physically and mentally and spiritually we see it, and how to I think that we have to find other ways of dialogues, other ways to bridge this and to meet each other in that dialogues and talking from a human perspective. What is my responsibility as a human being? How do I want to live and how do I want to interact in this world? And when I look at these conflicts, it's also, I can see them outside of myself.
She added that it's important that countries work together to reduce the effects of the mining industry on the environment as the negative impact is affecting the world. At the Climate Change Summit, delegates are looking at ways to strengthen cooperation with international NGOs and develop joint activities.
A News continues its live coverage of COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, with Orkan Amashev reporting directly from the scene. Good afternoon, Orkan. Can you share the latest updates?
Good afternoon, Leila. Yes, indeed. Today is day 8 of COP29, and naturally, our live coverage is also continuing. Yet, the key takeaway from today is that in the latest plenary session, the parties agreed on a working program as to how to move in connection with Article 6.8. And as you know, non-market approaches are entailed in the Article 6.8. These non-market approaches are absolutely essential in terms of assisting countries in terms of effective implementation of nationally determined contributions through adaptation, mitigation, technology transfer, and also capacity building. And eventually, of course, when Article 6 will be fully operational, this will lead to sustainable development and climate resilient future. So we have some tangible progress regarding Article 6.8. This is very important indeed. Earlier on day 1, we achieved something quite considerable regarding Article 6.4. As you remember, the ground rules in connection with establishing the key elements of the carbon credits market agreed. That's a framework structure. Certain details will be clarified at a later stage. And we know that there are some thorny discussions regarding Article 6.2. I haven't heard anything about Article 6.2, but we have tangible progress regarding Article 6.8. This is very important. So eventually, it is one of the objectives of COP29 presidency to make Article 6 fully operational. And once it is fully operational, it will reduce expenditure when it comes to nationally determined contributions by $250 billion, which I believe you mentioned yourself earlier. So the reason why this COP29 is already achieving something is because of some of the developments that took place prior to the 11th of November. There were intensive negotiations, consultations, certain standards were proposed before 11th November, and therefore, of course, now we have some tangible progress. There is a feeling in the air is that things are going in the right direction. Of course, as you know, the environment ministers are back in Azerbaijan. In a couple of days, some of other members of the environment agents of different countries will come back. The atmosphere here is incredibly hectic. Events are taking place in the blue zone, also in the green zone. There's going to be one event, I believe there's one event taking place actually now. It's regarding different NGOs from Turkic countries, and they will adopt some declaration at the end of it. So from day 1 till now, we have seen agenda adopted on day 1. We have seen progress regarding loss and damage fund. We have seen Article 6.4 standards being adopted. And today, a very, very important progress regarding Article 6.8. And we very much hope that when we speak next time, there'll be something else to say as well, in addition to what I said already.
Thank you, Arkan, for your update. Well, that's all we have for the time for. Stay with A News for the latest global and regional stories. And from all of us here in Baku, thanks for watching. Goodbye.